exciting. But anyhow, I just wanted to flag a few things maybe before we jumped in on Quicksilver. First of all, welcome
Yep.
everybody. As you are aware, this is the bi-weekly now, every 2 weeks, excuse me, Regenerati News Hour, where you have the opportunity to hear from on specific topics, as well as get general news and updates on what's happening around the Regen network ecosystem. I wanted to flag a few things that are just in movement. One, it feels like we've been talking about it for 6 months because we have, or more. But the Polygon bridge is moving quite nicely along. It's in testing, and it's looking like the first week of April, we'll start being able to make some public announcements around when it will be live and in use. And there'll be a series of kind of events related to that, including creating a pool in osmosis of NCT and Regen as an example. So that is happening. We'll just hold off on additional details until we can finalize that timeline. But just know that I think by the April 6th Regenerati News Hour, we should have some pretty exciting news to report. At least that's the plan, barring that nothing goes sideways between now and then. So big congrats to the R&D engineering team and Toucan and the Polygon community. And it's been a long trip to get here, but it feels like we're making fantastic progress. So stay tuned for that. I'm also up on Commonwealth, Regen Ledger 5.1 proposed upgrade. There's a post on the Regen Network handle that starts to discuss in Twitter style some of the upgrades, NCT basket updates, fixing a few errors and improving UX, prep for the Toucan Regen bridge, and some other minor upgrades. So anyhow, stay tuned. If you want to get some more details, please go to our Commonwealth, and you can dig in and find out what's moving there. And then that will go up on chain shortly for consideration by the community. And the team, continues to, the R&D team in particular continues to work on onboarding new credits, credit classes, lots of stuff exciting that hasn't quite reached public conversation yet. But the team is working quite hard and, to continue to support the origination from our community of nature-based carbon and ecological credits, bringing those to market and getting them into the Web 2 and Web 3 ecosystems. So stay tuned for some announcements around that. So with all that said, I'm very excited to have Vish and Will. Will is, as you may as you're aware, is a longtime Regen Network community member, as the president of the Regen Foundation Board of Directors, but is also here on his own to speak about a really exciting development with the passage of, I guess I'm trying to think of the proposal here. Will, do you have it offhand? But that allowed essentially the ICA module on Regen for Quicksilver. So I don't have the number here, but we can get into that. But we're going to unpack like what it means, what liquid staking is, what it means, this relationship between Regen Network and Quicksilver, the opportunities it avails, and unpacking kind of a pretty novel idea that has taken shape in the Cosmos ecosystem around liquid staking and this partnership we have with our friends over at Quicksilver. So, Vish, I'm going to add you as a speaper.
Yeah,
Will,
Vish,
do you want to pick
should
this?
we do a mic check here? Are you?
Vish, are you there?
Maybe we'll just see
Yeah,
what.
Vish, I assume you're aware of this, but just make sure that you're on a mobile phone and not on your laptop. There we go. I see you unmuted. Give it another shot when you get a chance. But while he's coming online, and I'll work on the back end. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll give some background, but
frame?
it just looks like you're. Want to give us a shout, Vish, if you can? Oh, we heard a little something there.
There.
Hey.
Oh, there you are.
There we go.
All right.
Great. Okay. So, just to give a quick recap here, Prop 26 had passed. I guess it was on the 28th of last month. Yep, we're hearing you, Vish. And that Prop 26, and that enabled this interchain accounts module, which was the kind of technical backend that needed to be in place for us to be able to have the Regen token go live on Quicksilver, the liquid staking zone. So it's I guess a big week for Quicksilver and for Regen, in that there is now a Regen Q Regen pair up on Osmosis pool number 948 on Frontier. And additionally, the Quicksilver token QCK has also gone live on Osmosis pool 952. But before we get into what all of that means, why don't we just begin here with a moment for you to introduce yourself, Vish?
Hey, yeah, sure. So I'm Vish. I'm one of the co-founders of Quicksilver. Quicksilver, if you guys aren't familiar, is a liquid staking zone in Cosmos. And we do liquid staking cross-chain, right? We're a sovereign chain that does liquid staking. Before I started Quicksilver, I was a part of Chorus One, which is another big validator in the Cosmos ecosystem. I was primarily doing like product research there, and the product was the liquid staking solution. Chorus One has been doing liquid staking research for a long time, so I was a part of it, building solutions. Worked on a bit for Lido for Solana. So really like gone through that liquid staking design space for some time to create, what we believe to be a really good liquid staking solution which solves many of the issues with liquid staking. So yeah, that's what we've been doing.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. So Regen Network, we're about regeneration of both lands and waters, and work with a lot of land stewards. I guess my first question for you would be, how would you explain Quicksilver, and which I guess also some of the liquid staking background, but also particularly the value proposition that Quicksilver is bringing to stakeholder groups like farmers, scientists, other folks like that. I know not an easy question to kick things off here, but we'll see what tact you take here.
Yeah, there's actually a pretty good analogy I like to use, right? Liquid staking essentially provides liquidity on your staked assets, right? Or on your assets, if that makes sense, right? Like everybody at some point in their life, have assets which are illiquid, right? You have your house, which is an illiquid asset, right? But you're still able to take a loan off of your house by essentially creating a paper form out of it, right? You can say, okay, this is my house, it costs this much, and then you can leverage it, you can borrow off of it, you could use it for finance, right? You can do the same thing with gold, right? Nobody actually carries around hunks of gold to trade. It's done on paper. So when you put a physical asset on paper, you're creating a derivative out of it. But when you put a proof of stake asset or a staked proof of stake asset through Quicksilver, you get a Q asset, which is a derivative of your staked asset, right? And the primary use case of this is it provides you liquidity, right? You can use this asset in DeFi. You can just sit on the liquidity, have some flexibility, with your portfolio. So yeah, it completely transforms the landscape of proof of stake assets, right? Because if people are familiar with proof of stake assets, they generate staking rewards, right? So as they generate staking rewards, you won't be able to do anything else with it if it's locked up, right? So what you want to do is earn these rewards while doing something else with this asset. So to enable this, liquid staking is pretty necessary.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that was a great description there. Definitely this corollary to all kinds of other assets that we don't actually physically trade most of the time, but use other kinds of derivatives. I can totally see that carrying through. So I guess the next, so you've had a front seat with liquid staking from day one, and that Chorus One had been commissioned. I think it might have been by Interchain to publish a report on liquid staking. Maybe it was back in 2019 or something. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess so. You've been around the liquid staking scene for a while here. Why Quicksilver? What distinguishes you from some of the other approaches out there, and what's your guys' kind of vision specifically for how Quicksilver wants to be bringing quick liquid staking to this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things that Quicksilver does different. So I guess the first thing is, for any liquid staking solution, you can divide it into two layers, right? The first layer is the actual staking or liquid staking layer of it, and the second part of it is, okay, how do you choose validators, right? So on the first problem, I think many liquid staking solutions have aligned. Back in our last year's Feb white paper, we unveiled the concept of like a sovereign chain, right? A sovereign liquid staking chain, which can use interchain accounts to connect to other chains to provide liquid staking. So you have a chain agnostic liquid staking solution, right? One liquid staking protocol which can provide liquid staking for many chains. This wasn't always the case, right? Because back in the day, liquid staking protocols were smart contracts. Many of them still are, right? You deploy it on one chain, and if you want to serve another chain, you have to deploy another contract. So this changed, right? And when interchain accounts came out, we knew that we had to build this, and that was like what motivated us to start Quicksilver in the first place. Now, there are many liquid staking protocols now that use this model, uh, but Quicksilver has differences on the second layer that I mentioned, right, which is the validator distribution layer. I think Quicksilver is the only liquid staking protocol in all of crypto right now which has a completely permissionless and open validator set. Usually, liquid staking protocols have a whitelist, right? They choose some validators based on a number of factors, and they delegate to these validators, and they choose what percentage of assets go to these validators, right? This really hurts the sovereignty of the chain. The way we saw it, Cosmos was all about, you choose your validators. Your validators play an important role in not just securing your assets, but also representing you on that chain, in governance and community discussions and just determining the future of the chain, right? Uh, so validator choice was important. And this is also a security thing, right? Like you want validators to read the code they're upgrading, right? The code they're pushing. Um, if you have 100% liquid staking world where they're just getting their delegations from, an all powerful protocol, there's no incentive to do like many of these other tasks that validators have to do in the ecosystem, right? So validator having a completely open validator set was absolutely necessary. Now we also take so one step further by letting people actually choose which validators to delegate to, right? We have this thing called signaling intent. When you stake with Quicksilver, you can choose which validators you want to stake with and at what percentage. So I think Quicksilver is also the only liquid staking protocol in crypto which has this approach to validator distribution. And actually, what's cool about this is you can do this cross chain, right? Like, let's say you've chosen a validator A, and now you have your assets, you have your Q region in an osmosis pool, right? But you're not happy with your validator choice. You want to change it. You can actually change that validator choice without pulling your assets out of that pool, right? We do this with interchain queries. So you can have your assets anywhere in DeFi, but still maintain sovereignty over your validator choices.
So, Vish, this is Dave. I have a question. Just can you explain a little bit about the kind of the nuances of how this impacts governance for the folks that are, staking on Quicksilver and then signaling their intent on which validator for those assets to be staked with? does it change how governance works slightly at all? The same? Maybe just for transparency, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it largely remains the same, right? If you choose to stake 300 regen with stake Cedo, stake Cedo would then have 300 regions worth of voting power, just as they would if someone natively delegated those assets, right? Uh, but also another cool feature that we're working on is this thing called governance by proxy, right? Is what we essentially let Q regen holders vote on governance proposals that happen on the regen chain, right? And again, what's cool about this is that you can do cross chain. If you're a liquidity provider on the Q regen pool, you can still participate in regen governance proposals without pulling your assets out of that pool, right? So now you can do DeFi governance and staking all at the same time. Because also this is something that I thought was never really fair, because you have a governance process and then you have people who participate in DeFi, and they're essentially locked out of governance, right? If you're not staking, you're locked out, which I guess from a consensus model perspective makes sense, but in like an actual ecosystem building perspective, didn't really work out for us. So this is something you can do with Quicksilver.
That's helpful. Thank you for sharing. And then, maybe just another context, just giving you the opportunity to spread your wings a little bit about the benefits of Quicksilver. Obviously, there are emerging projects that are offering some version of liquid staking within the Cosmos ecosystem. Is there kind of just a general what makes Quicksilver unique, as far as people's consideration on where they're going to utilize liquid staking?
Yeah, absolutely. So to summarize, what essentially differentiates Quicksilver is that while staking with Quicksilver, you can choose your own validators and you can change your choices at any given point of time, right? The second big differentiator is you can vote on governance proposals using Quicksilver assets, and you can do this no matter where your assets are, right? You don't need to have them locked. You don't need to have them on the Quicksilver chain. They can be anywhere in the interchain, and you can vote with them. I'd say those are two of the biggest differentiators of Quicksilver. There are also some, I guess, technical level differentiators, but when it comes to like features that users can see and feel, these are the biggest ones.
And could you maybe elaborate on from a roadmap perspective, obviously with Quicksilver having its own sovereign zone, what does that avail to you as far as the ability to create more interesting tooling or feature sets as you move forward? And you have a sense of, from a roadmap perspective for the rest of the year, directionally kind of where Quicksilver is looking to continue to evolve and up level to meet, pretty dynamic Cosmos ecosystem, with new modules being developed and all kind, and just how the market is shifting and changing.
Yeah, so it's essentially two layers of development that Quicksilver will work on. One is the contract layer, right? We are going to enable Cosmosm. People can deploy contracts. Existing applications can deploy their outposts on Quicksilver. So that will go on, right? Contracts will be built on Quicksilver. But the other thing we're also planning to do in 2023 is really leverage this claims infrastructure we've built. So all of the features I've talked about, I've kept mentioning that, oh, you can do this cross chain, right? That's actually a pretty big deal in Cosmos because you've never been able to do that. When you take your assets from chain A to chain B, as far as the chain A logic is concerned, those assets are gone, right? And this obviously makes composability very difficult in Cosmos because you have your assets on multiple chains, but how does each chain logic know that these assets exist, that they belong to you, what they're doing? So we've built this thing called the claims module, right, which uses interchain queries to essentially figure out which which assets belong to which user on which chain. We currently use this for voting on governance proposals, choosing your validators, things like that. We want to expand this use case, right? This can theoretically be used for anything, and we're the only Cosmos chain to have this sort of tech built out. So that's something we're definitely looking to leverage in 23.
Great. Yeah. So I guess just to walk people through some of the things that they might be able to do with liquid stake regen. I guess the first question would be, what can people do? They can head over to Quicksilver Zone and liquid stake their regen. What sorts of things might they be able to do with Q regen right now?
Yeah. So right now, the best thing to do would be to provide liquidity to the Q regen pool. It's really important we build that pool up to a point where we can then start supporting uh, lending or collateral integrations, right? I think that would be like a next big step for QRegen, where you can actually use it as collateral to borrow assets or to mint stable coins, right? Uh, so I'd say those are like step one and step two. But then after that, it's pretty much limitless, right? Any DeFi application that comes in Cosmos can you utilize QRegen.
Awesome. Yeah. And I actually shared the links in the comments here, just if people want to head over to app.quicksilver.zone to liquid stake, or if they want to contribute liquidity to that pool 948. Yeah, I guess at this point that this kind of brings me through some of the questions I was hoping to ask you, Vish. Dave, I don't know if you either want to move the conversation along to some other pieces, or if we want to have an opportunity for anyone from the audience here to ask some questions, or whatever sounds
Yeah,
good.
I think, I encourage, if anyone has got questions for Vish or the Quicksilver team, please feel free to hop up on stage or ask a question. Certainly this is some new territory, I believe. Looking at the Quicksilver app, I think we're one of 3 chains, is that right, Vish, so far, that are engaged on the app so far. Is that right?
Yeah. The 3 chains.
Awesome. And then maybe, again, similar roadmap style. Are we expecting some more chains coming on? Are there any, and maybe even talking about like how chains engage? So it sounds like, just a little bit as a governance geek, that and maybe the terminology can help me with, but I don't know if it's the host chain or the connecting chain. It needs to put up a governance proposal to enable the ICA module on their own chain. And then after that, though, it sounds relatively seamless. So your favorite chains or zones out in Cosmos can connect in pretty quickly and activate. Do you want to just maybe outline and explain kind of the governance community process on both sides of Quicksilver and the other chain?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, for any chain to be onboarded onto Quicksilver, they need to have interchain accounts enabled with like a few critical message types being enabled with that, right? Staking, message weighted vote, that kind of thing. Uh, Once that's done, and ICA is, interchain accounts is going to a level where it's going to be standardized on every chain. So it's almost an assumption that ICA will exist on most chains, right? As people upgrade their Cosmos SDK and as use cases come up. So once interchain accounts is enabled on the chain, uh, on the chain that needs to be onboarded onto Quicksilver, it's a pretty seamless process from there, right? Anyone can essentially put up a governance proposal on Quicksilver, and this opens an interchain account on that chain, and then you can start liquid staking from there on. Currently, I think Osmosis, there's a proposal to onboard Osmosis, which is going. I think it ends by today. But yeah, once that's done, Osmosis will also be available for liquid staking.
And Vish, not to put you on the spot here, but I'm curious, again, as knowing that Regen is focused on tokenizing ecological assets, bringing ecological credits to both the Web 2 and Web 3 markets. and generally even within the Cosmos ecosystem, looking to, kind of imbue ecological values, carbon offsetting, and things like that. I'm curious either from, if you have any novel ideas that you think that this might open up, just as far as, a values driven like public goods development opportunities, or just more broadly, what other public goods opportunities that you might see that this liquid staking opportunity offers to the Cosmos ecosystem. Are any novel ideas that have been rolling around in your head, or anything along those lines that might be fun to explore?
Yeah, I do have an idea, but I don't know how novel it is, but I'll say it nonetheless. Um, essentially, I thought this was like a great way to create demand for Regen, and like the entire like tokenized ecological asset marketplace in Cosmos, right? I think many people and institutions in Cosmos want to hold ecological assets, but the question is, what do we do? What do we do with them, right? And what's the opportunity cost uh, versus holding an ecological, holding an ecological asset versus holding, any other Cosmos asset, right? And I think liquid staking can really bridge that gap, right? If we create deep liquidity on that pool and create all of these really cool and exciting use cases, uh, then there's like a very clear reason for people to buy these ecological assets, right? Uh, and the opportunity costs and holding them and using them in DeFi would be greatly reduced. So you can really create like this vibrant market, right, where people and even potentially protocols, right, are buying regen, to offset their carbon emissions, and then they're liquid staking it as Q regen, providing liquidity, borrowing off of it. You can have each protocol own some Q regen to offset their carbon emissions. But imagine if you could borrow off of that, right? If someone wanted to, do a community pool spend, instead of giving a grant, you can borrow off your Q regen and then use it, right? So all of these like exciting protocol level use cases also become more easy to do with Q regen out there and integrated in DeFi. So yeah, those are a couple of thoughts that I had.
Love it. Thanks for sharing. It's something to think about for sure. One other question, and again, I'm a bit smooth brained on this stuff relative to how the Q regen pool shows up. What's the dynamic with impermanent loss or slippage? Is that, I'm trying to wrap my head around what that even means or look like when you have the native regen token and Q regen in the same pool. And I assume this is whatever the answer is, it applies to all the other zones that may be connecting into Quicksilver and having similar type pools and their Q representative, in that same pool.
Yeah. So impermanent loss basically occurs when the price of one asset in the pool changes in relation to the other asset, right? So you have, when you've deposited your assets 50-50, that ratio is not 50-50 anymore. And so you've experienced impermanent loss, right? Now, with Q regen and regen, uh, you're not going to experience any impermanent loss because both of the assets are fundamentally the same and their price is correlated. So very, very little impermanent loss on these pools. And to make it even better, it's a stable swap pool, right? A stable swap pool is essentially a pool where the price of the assets and incentives are concentrated across a price range, right? This essentially means super tight liquidity around a very tight price range. Uh, this means even less slippage, even less impermanent loss for liquidity providers. So yeah, that really makes like the liquid staking LP opportunity a really low risk opportunity. And if you look at like mature markets, it's actually a very low reward opportunity too, right? If you go to like any of the curve pools versus like Uniswap pools, the curve pools have much lower APYs, especially more established stable swap pools. So in Cosmos, we're at that place now where stable swap pools are still early, so they're giving out pretty high rewards. So yeah, quite an opportunity to get involved with like a low risk, high reward pool.
That's super helpful. Thanks, Vish. And yeah, again, pardon the somewhat silly question, still wrapping my head around how all of that works, but always something new to learn here in Cosmos. So, with that, Will, I don't know if you have any final questions. I thought we'd actually, I just wanted to focus on Quicksilver today, unless the community has other things they'd like to unpack, and of course, any questions for the Quicksilver team. But Will, anything, some final thoughts here, at least on the Quicksilver topic, and if the community doesn't have any additional thoughts or questions, I'm actually proposing we wrap up and just finish on a high note here with the Quicksilver team.
Sure, yeah. So maybe one more thing that would be helpful to walk through, just some of this liquid staking 101. Vish, could you just share a little bit about the way the redemption rate works and kind of compounded staking works when people have their regen and they switch them into liquid staked regen, and then there's this kind of growing difference between the value of those two tokens? Could you just walk people through about what's going on there?
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, when you stake Regen with Quicksilver, you get back Q Regen, right? But the way Q Regen works is that its value keeps increasing over time, right? So you can think about it like a vault, which keeps earning you rewards. Your regen is locked inside that vault, and the Q regen is the key to that vault. Now, the value of the key increases as the amount in the vault keeps increasing, right? So you're out there, you have this key, you're playing around with it, doing DeFi, trading it, while your regen stays in this vault, gaining value. That's what we call redemption rate, right? You can essentially open the vault with the key and redeem all of your assets, right? So at the price at which you can redeem your assets is the redemption rate. So this redemption rate should keep increasing as staking rewards accrue.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I think that's just helpful for people to kind of understand some of the basics about how that works. Well, Vish, I've been so glad that we could host you here on the Regenerati News Hour today. Really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through all of this. As I mentioned, there's a few links in the comments if people want to dig in a little further here. And I guess I'll hand it back over to you, Dave, to close us out.
That sounds great. Thank you. Again, thanks, Vish, and the Quicksilver community and team. Really appreciate the partnership. You all have been wonderful to work with. And again, with my Loa Labs validator hat on and validating for both chains, it's really been enjoyable, professional, and just good vibes all the way across. So just as we're starting to wrap up here, a few things I wanted to pick up. Ishmael, I'm not sure if you're available, but I'd love maybe if you could hop on and discuss the Stargaze proposal that just went up, I think it was yesterday. So I don't know if you're in a space. If you are in a space, you can hop up. I'm just going to invite you to speak. But this continues the ongoing efforts between Regen Network community and our friends around the Cosmos ecosystem of getting up Cosmos Zero proposals, where communities are invited to consider carbon offsetting or going carbon neutral. So we've been working closely with the Stargaze community on the latest Cosmos Zero proposal that has gone up. So if you are a token holder in Stargaze and you feel strongly about this, please feel free to jump in. That I can't remember the length of the Stargaze governance window, but it is up and active. I'm positive that Loa Labs validator will be voting yes for those of you who stick with Loa Labs. But certainly invite you to jump in and continue the ongoing opportunities around that. Will, did you have thought around that?
I was just going to say, it looks like it closes in 2 days.
2 days.
Thank you.
Thank you for the update. Yep. Yeah. So that's happening on the Cosmos Zero, and I think after that we don't have. I don't think there's anything imminent on the Cosmos Zero front. I think we're taking a bit of a breather. Actually, Ishmael is joining us. Hold on just a sec. Speaker. All right. Ishmael is connecting, so please stand by. So anyhow, while he's connecting, so it's been, I'd say, relatively a pretty successful, exciting campaign. You know, I got to share again, I think, as we've discussed before, we've learned a ton throughout this campaign on where communities are at, the variety of, frankly, the unique nature of each particular chain, where some have community pools that they are healthy and have allowed them to directly offset or purchase and retire their carbon and offset their chains, and others we've worked with more creatively, where they've purchased where actually Regen has utilized the purchase and actually staked the tokens of those native chains. So instead of us, the community pools of the participating chains, or buying that NCT directly from the osmosis or soon to be osmosis pool, you know, which has, you know, price action related to how you know, depending on the size of the purchase, those communities with particularly smaller community pools, or tokens who've particularly suffered during the bear market, the Regen network development has played a really strong role in understanding that reality and allowing the retirement of that carbon and staking with those tokens that help purchase that to ensure, you know, which is in the Cosmos way, an ongoing, interesting, exciting relationship with that particular chain, as well as you know, taking advantage of hitting the carbon offsetting goals. So just flagging that for future reference. So with all that said, I think we're going to go ahead and retire. Unfortunately, Ishmael is not being allowed up, but we are done for the day here. So thank you, everybody. Just a reminder, next week is our community call. Always invite you in to participate. It's a different way of getting in and digging in with the Regen network development community from our engineering, registry, science teams. And then back on April 6th, we'll be back here with the Regenerati News Hour, where we'll be digging into, ideally, some exciting news with the arrival of NCT into the Cosmos ecosystem and Regen network, and kind of what that means, what the opportunities are. So April 6th, mark your calendars. But otherwise, thanks again, everybody. We hope you have a great week. Thanks again to the Quicksilver team and Vish, and we will talk soon. Thanks a bunch.